I'm excited to be here. My goal is simple: to educate you, to entertain you, and hopefully to engage you in our exciting new nonprofit mission. I've organized my talk around 3 acts with two discussion breaks that Brookes will lead. And then there's a little prelude before we begin the 3 acts. Facts and myths about human nature, things people say, isn't it true? And I'm going to say, no, no, no. And the same thing, facts about business realities, which are mostly false. So Act 1 is going to be creating evil. It's something that I made a reputation in. Act 2 is going to be understanding heroism, which is my new mission in life. And Act 3 is inspiring everyday heroism in boardrooms and the C-suite. And we call ourselves the Heroic Imagination Project, or simply HIP. First, a few myths. You can't change human nature. The brain's neurons are fixed at birth. We all know that. Personality is fully formed by adolescence. IQ is genetically inherited, and it determines your success in life. Evil is the devil's work by a few bad apples, and heroes are born as special people. Now the reality. Human nature is endlessly modified by nurture's experiences. Neurons are born, die, and change continuously over a lifetime. Personality evolves constantly. IQ is raised or lowered by stimulation or deprivation. Your success is a function of social, emotional intelligence and opportunity, at least as much as your IQ. Everyone has the potential to do evil, and I will describe today almost everyone. There's a small 10% who we're going to call the superheroes who can resist. And last but not least, heroes are ordinary people who usually work in groups. Myths in business. It's enough to hire good people for business to be successful. Leaders' actions make a difference. If you're not in charge, your actions don't matter. It's how we stand up to the dramatic situation that makes a difference. Some realities. Without awareness and skills, it's easy for good people to become corrupt, especially in business, where so much money is involved. What we do or don't do matters, regardless of where we are in the hierarchy. This is where leadership support is critical. It's how we respond to everyday ethical challenges that make the biggest difference and that safeguards the integrity of the organization. So throughout, I'm going to have momentary reflection, say, hello, think about this, and then we're going to have 2 discussion periods where we actually want you to talk to your neighbors about the ideas. So what are the greatest obstacles or barriers to bringing courageous behavior into the boardroom and to the executive team? Now, this is no different in an institution like a Stanford or nonprofits. What are the opportunities you see within your organization for doing so, for bringing courageous behavior? Courageous behavior means being able to stand up, speak out against fraud, injustice, corruption of any kind, or taking action when other people are doing nothing. Why does it matter? So let's take a moment to reflect on Brookes' story about how she first made the transformation into where she is now.
What our programs foster is enabling you to act consistently and skillfully on your values in the face of situational pressure.
Brooke, that align directly with our initiatives.
Thank you again for the invitation to come. We've been looking forward to this. I used to run an investor relations firm. We've been hired by a company to come in. They just brought in a new CEO and CFO, and the company was very well known for its values-based business. And they wanted to ensure the ethical standards of the company. The CFO I'd actually worked with in the past. He'd hired me before. Was also a very ethics-driven man. The CEO, we found fairly quickly, although great at operations, had a very casual approach with the way he spoke to the public, particularly our institutional investors, around non-public information. in which what many of you know, the SEC doesn't take kindly to companies taking it casually with the way they talk about non-public communication, especially quarterly earnings numbers. So the board of directors had a very straight conversation with the CEO when he had come a little bit too close to the line and said, this is a zero tolerance for us. We don't threaten the reputation of this company. So then I sat down with him and laid out very clearly the boundaries between what was acceptable communication to investors. 3 weeks after that, I get a phone call from the portfolio manager of our largest institutional investor who says, Brooke, off the record, I just wanted to let you know, the CEO, in a conversation with your CEO and 2 members of my team, your CEO definitely insinuated more about the quarterly earnings than he should have. And when he laid out the details, he definitely crossed the line. Not the information that you want. So I called a meeting with the CFO and his direct reports. So there's 7 of us in the room, and I deliver the information. And I know it's going to be hard for him, and I can see him struggling. The additional wrinkle to the story is the CEO was a friend of his and actually was the one who brought him in. So he looks at me after a minute and he says, I think we should do some more research. Let's do some more research and give it a little time. I'm so dumbstruck by the answer that just like when I was a kid playing soccer, everything goes into slow motion. And I'm thinking, my brain's going, that's not the answer you're supposed to give me. I know this man. He's very ethically oriented. And it's clear we don't need research. We have a very credible eyewitness. We have 3 eyewitnesses. And the last thing you want to do in this situation is put time between when you know and when you say. So I'm sort of looking around, and everyone in the room is nodding their heads. And I'm thinking, am I insane? But the piece that's humbling and that struck me is then I can watch my train of thought go, well, maybe it's not such a big deal. Maybe it's not. We could just talk to him off this, on the side, tell him he can never do it again. I just nod. Maybe it's just fine. So I'm flooded with this sense of relief. There's not going to be any big public disclosure. No one gets fired. The board doesn't have, nothing happens. And then I get struck with this man that I know hired me to do my job and to stand for his values when he was most conflicted. So I stepped back into time and I said, I think we should go to the board. And he paused and he nodded and we did. But what I will never forget is how vulnerable I am, and we all are, to situational influence all the time. Because it's just the way we're wired. It used to save our lives for evolutionary purposes. It just doesn't. It gets in our way now sometimes. So it's very easy for the situations to pull the worst and have us take that first step down the slippery slope, and then you're in. And then it's really hard to get yourself out of it.
Thank you. So a moment of reflection. Are you told everything you need to do your job effectively? Do you know if your organization is at risk because people don't feel accountable or don't feel empowered to speak up in situations like that? Just think about those. And some of those might be part of your discussion later on. So Act 1, creating bad behavior. How are we going to define it? There are 2 types of evil. The evil of action, where you do bad things. And the broad evil that we're all responsible for is the evil of inaction. Not doing the right thing when the right thing is there. So every one of us feels the shame of knowing that you were in a classroom where some kid was getting bullied and you did nothing, as I did. And bullying now is not only a problem in schools, it was talked about, it's a major problem in business. And so the evil of inaction is the shame you feel by not doing something you know you could do to change a bad situation. And then we'll look at instances in the laboratory. It was mentioned about the Stanford prison study. I'll go over that very quickly, as well as the famous study by Stanley Milgram, my high school classmate, on blind obedience to authority. And lastly, we'll talk about evil in business, or bad behavior, if you don't want to talk about it as evil. So what makes people go wrong is a question that theologians have asked for years. Dramatists certainly have played with this, poets. Psychologists tend not to ask questions of that magnitude. We tend to ask more specific questions in the form of a hypothesis for which we can then design an experiment. I was asking those questions as a little kid. Because as I mentioned to one of you, I grew up in the South Bronx. I grew up in an inner city ghetto, which was ghetto, 50, 60 years ago. It still is. And if you grow up in any inner city, you are surrounded by evil. Evil meaning influence agents whose job it is to get kids to do bad things, to join gangs, to sell drugs, to take drugs, to sell your body, et cetera, cheat, steal. And lots of kids give in to that. And some kids do, and some kids don't. I had friends who went to jail, who got killed or committed suicide. And so I was always curious, why did good people I knew were good, do bad things? And so I wrote a book recently called The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. It was a New York Times bestseller. And in it, I focus in great detail about the Stanford prison study, which I'll mention briefly. And then I also talk about Abu Ghraib, which I'll mention briefly here, because I was an expert witness for one of the guards. And Abu Ghraib was the mirror of Stanford prison study, only exponentially higher. In the process of trying to understand reflectively, years later, what happened in the Stanford prison study, what happened in Abu Ghraib, I became aware of 3 different ways of thinking about evil. The typical way when we think about evil, we think about the actor, the person who does the deed. And we try to understand his or her dispositions. What are the personality traits? What are the characters? In the extreme, they're psychopaths. And when they do bad things, we label them the bad apples. That's going to get you nowhere. If there's anything you want to get out of this talk is knowing someone's personality does not allow you to predict anything about him or her. If I want to predict what you're going to do tomorrow, all I have to know is what you did yesterday. Given the fact that you have freedom of choice, we all arrange our lives to be safe and secure and predictable. So the best predictor of what you're going to do is not your personality scales, it's what you do yesterday. If you're in the same situation, you're probably going to do the same thing. The main thing that comes out of all the research that I've done and my colleagues in social psychology is to say, human behavior is shaped by the behavioral context in which we live, by the social and physical environment in which we perform our functions, in which we play a role. It's the rules, the roles of that situation, and we're typically unaware of the subtle situational forces that impact us. And when we see bad apples, then we should be looking for a barrel that corrupts good people, good apples into bad apples. And that's what happened in the prison study. That's what happened in Abu Ghraib. But it wasn't until I started focusing on Abu Ghraib that I asked the question, who created that terrible situation that put our military policemen in this situation to work 12 hours night shift? The man I defended, Chip Frederick, was the sergeant in charge. He worked 12 hours a night, 7 days a week for 40 days without a day off. Under extreme stress with no leadership experience, and he's in charge of up to 1,000 prisoners, 60 Iraqi guards who are smuggling weapons and drugs in, and he has no leadership ability. And so, given the stress of the job, his judgment is impaired. And so he stops getting the other guards, he stops getting them to do the right thing, and he gets corrupted by the situation to do the bad thing. So we have to really understand who are the bad barrel makers. And this is the system. This is organizational influence, political, economic, cultural, and legal. And most psychology doesn't do this. It's only family therapy who treats the family as a system. So when we see bad behavior, what do? If we're caring and nurturing, we educate, we can give therapy, we can punish a little bit, we can send you to jail, and when we're extreme, we can sterilize you so you don't pass on as bad genes, or we can execute you. All of our programs to change behavior begin and end at the dispositional level. That's what psychiatry is all about. And so it's only by saying, if the problem is situational or systemic, you're wasting your time doing the individual dispositional treatment therapy. So, for example, when I did shyness research here at Stanford, our clinic had almost 100% success rate. And for every person we helped, that day there were more than 100 new shy people, because it was systemic. It's not really about the person. The person is a symptom of a broader problem. Anyway, so power corrupts. Just thinking about your power makes you more likely to cheat and less likely to think about others. That's an amazing statement. It's from a book that's about to come out, The Winner Effect, How Power Affects Your Brain, by neuroscientist Ian Robertson. Research by Max Bazerman and Anne Tenbrussel at Harvard says simply focusing on business objectives means that the ethical implications will fade from your mind. If all you care about is the bottom line, then you can list, here's all my ethical concerns, they fade. And so situational pressures lead to ethical fading. In our research, unethical conduct happens because people are unconsciously fooling themselves. It helps explain why lapses in action in the corporate world seem so pervasive and so intractable. So the ethical fading is you focus on a short-term business goal, and what erodes is the long-term values. And this is what we saw in the meltdown a few years ago. Every major investment company was doing this, short-term business goals, giving high-interest loans to people who had no credit at all, no worthy credit, and you didn't care about the long-term consequences to those people, to your company, and ultimately to our nation. So the psychology of fraud. Why do good people do bad things? So that I've been asking questions about why do my good friends do bad things. So the mental checklist is, what might I gain? How will it affect the future? That's a business decision. The ethical decision is this fair? Will people be hurt by what I do? I think I went an extra mile to be transparent in everything I did. People wanted to work with Toby. For close to a decade, his business thrived. Toby became distracted by his many projects. The paperwork started piling up, and so did the mistakes. So in 2004, Toby was shocked to discover his company was $240,000 in debt. What was he going to do? He said, I can fix it. He just needed one loan, a loan he would never get if he told the truth about his income. And so it began, and so it spreads. I turned to a couple of staff members who knew how it all worked. I was really open. Listen, I screwed up and I need your help. He was honest. And every single person complied because they trusted him from the past. It started to occur to me that this is not going to stop. I'm not fixing anything. It became ultra clear that everything I'd been taught, I was going against. So he began to do liquid medication. And how's this going to end for me? It ends in jail. And this is not a cartoon. This is a story that's been repeated over and over again. And modern systemic corruption, these are just a few of the companies that we all know about. Let's look at, so Countrywide, Winston Smith is on our corporate board of directors, and he was the man who blew the whistle on Countrywide. Countrywide was one of the biggest mortgage brokers in America, and they were the ones who actually started making these terrible loans. They would make a loan to anybody as long as you could breathe, okay? Meaning you didn't have to have a job. You didn't have to have any education. All you needed to say, I want a loan. And they would give you a low-interest loan. And then they would started packaging these loans and selling as derivatives to other companies. And he blew the whistle on them, and he recently, after, I guess, a long period, he actually won the case. So let's look at Enron.
Enron was especially a big deal by the end of the year 2000 because by then most internet companies had already begun to fall and everybody on Wall Street was looking for the next big thing. And here you had Enron, which appeared to be this shining star of a new economy company. Its stock price went up 90% in the year 2000 and had gone up over 50% the year before that. It was an it stock on Wall Street, one of those companies that can seemingly do no wrong.
We were the poster child for the new economy. We had this culture that had a lot of focus on reminding us how good we were. And as that culture emerged, then we get to Fortune magazine telling us we were the most innovative corporation in America. then we really began to feel good about ourselves.
People pressured by the need to keep the stock price up begin to cheat a little bit, but then the next quarter comes along and you have to cheat a little more to do the new cheating to make up for the old cheating. And before long, you've created a momentum that now you can't stop.
$450 million in equity.
Andy, in many ways, was someone we all knew didn't have a strong moral compass. It's almost like Jeff Skilling said, okay, we're hitting some troubled times. Let's set up Andy so we can fill the earnings holes when we need to, knowing that Andy would probably skim a little bit.
As disturbing as Enron's own misconduct is the growing evidence that leading U.S. financial institutions not only took part in Enron's deceptive practices, but at times designed, advanced, and profited from them.
The Enron fraud is the story of synergistic corruption. There are supposed to be checks and balances in the system. The lawyers are supposed to say no. The accountants are supposed to say no. The bankers are supposed to say no, but no one who was supposed to say no said no.
So that's systemic corruption throughout. Two off-duty cops are talking to each other. And one says to the other, I'm neither a good cop nor a bad cop, Jerome. Like yourself, I'm a complex amalgam of positive and negative personality traits that emerge or not depending on the circumstances. So that's the basic theme I've been working on. So circumstances mean the environment, the social environmental situation. So the rules don't apply. In society and business, corruption creates cynicism, disengagement, and burnout, leading to increased risk, organizational vulnerability, declines in productivity, innovation, and profitability. And it's not what you do, it's who you know. He may blur the lines, but he's a rainmaker. He's going to bring in big money. I know this firsthand. The other part of my background is my family is Sicilian, and so we know this, that I have an educational foundation. I send high school kids to college, and the mothers say it's really nice. It doesn't matter if they get a degree or not. If you don't have the contact, you won't succeed. So it's all about who you know. And the worst thing about corruption, it creates that widespread cynicism. It doesn't matter what you do. It only matters who you know. So the anatomy of a slippery slope. A Fortune 500 company reeling from public scandal of its managers engaging in many illegalities engaged us to illuminate systemic influences that unwittingly encouraged its bad behavior. And we wanted to promote what we call a self-correcting culture of integrity in place of the culture that they had of sidestepping integrity. So the review uncovered a clear slippery slope. A slippery slope is that you make a little mistake and another one and bigger, and once you start down, it's very hard to do the recorrection because you're aware that I should have done it before. And so it really, you get caught up in what's known as a cognitive dissonance. So our findings were, after they let us review all their records for the past dozen years, the behavior of the people in question were counter to the values they're overlooked. They deliberately ignored and rewarded, really, this bad behavior. The framework to hire, fire, and promote was not tied to their corporate values. They say, here's our corporate values. They announce it publicly, but in fact, people get hired, get fired, get rewarded when they do things not in line with the corporate values. The focus on producing money as the main value, over in contradiction to all other corporate values, turned out to be the dominant motivator in this company. So our conclusions were there was a systemic lack of checks and balances that allowed markets to go unchecked and transform into acceptable practices. The system encourages bad behavior and discourages courageous behavior. Eventually, it resulted in damage to the internal as well as external faith and integrity of the organization. So here we could look at their records. Somebody gets a negative evaluation on a whole series of dimensions that the company says is important, but he is bringing in lots of business, lots of consultation. And that fact that he's a rainmaker leads them to ignore a recommendation that he be fired. In fact, he gets promoted rather than fired. And this is over and over again. And at the end of a period of 10 years, he's involved in fraudulent activity for which he recently was sent to jail. So I want to switch quickly to two lines of research. One, as he said, obedience to authority. The Stanley Milgram study was done back in the 60s. As I said, he and I were high school classmates in the Bronx at James Monroe High School. And he was a little Jewish kid, and he asked two questions as a kid. He said, would you electrocute a stranger if Hitler or somebody like him asked you to? And secondly, could the Holocaust happen in America? We were in a high school class in 1947. It's not that far from the Second World War. And he had family who were suffered in the Holocaust. And he was worried. And people said, no, Stanley, we're Americans. We wouldn't do that. He said, how do you know unless you were in that situation? We all like to think we'd always do the good thing. And so he was the first one who said, let's create a situation where we put people in that setting that Nazi youths were put in or that German people were put in, and let's see what they actually do instead of what they say they do.
In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an electronic box that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learn. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment. Would you roll up your right sleeve, please? This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
About 2 years ago, I was in the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experimenter. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is to teach the learner a simple word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts. And you increase the shock one step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts. Hard hit. Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary. 150 volts. Sad face.
Wait a minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now.
It's absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, teacher.
Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed.
Now, this man makes disobedient.
So it turns out that 2 out of every 3 people that Milgram tested, and he tested more than 1,000 people in New Haven, Connecticut, and then he did another set in Bridgeport, Connecticut, including one group of women. 2/3 went all the way to 450 volts. The person in the other room is screaming, yelling, I want to quit. And most people are good people, and they say, sir, I don't really want to go on. He said, I'm sorry, you have a contract. You have to continue. You can't quit. And the only way you could get out of the study is 3 times you say, I quit the experiment, I refuse to go on. And those were the 1/3 who refused. So I want to argue that all evil begins with 15 volts. That you're sitting there, and when you press that first button, you're on that slippery slope. Because you should think to yourself, why would they have all of these buttons if they didn't expect somebody to go 300, 375, 400, 450? And so it's really a powerful message. And what it is the brilliance of Milgram's study was having the gradual increments, 15, 30, 45, etc., so that at any point you're only slightly more extreme than where you were. And that is sucking you in. So each thing, and again, it's with Enron, nobody cooked the books, you warmed them up. You made a little change, you changed a few numbers. And once you change those few numbers, you change bigger numbers. And once you're on that slippery slope, then it was all over for you. Reflection. Do you ever do something outside of your values because your boss asks you to? Well, he doesn't say do something outside of your value. He said, how about this? Or we need you, or you're the special person. You're the only one I can rely on. How about doing this? So again, the pressure, the social pressure of authority is always there. So the Stanford prison study was a follow-up of Milgram's study done 10 years later, because in my world, it's rare somebody tells you to do a bad thing. We live in institutions. We grow up in families, we go to school, we're in businesses, we're in the military, we're in mental hospitals, we're in old age homes, sadly. And in those situations, nobody tells you to do a bad thing. There is a group that is doing a bad thing. There are rules that can get perverted to do bad things. There's protocol. There's subtle group pressures. And so the Stanford prison study was really a focus on institutionalized evil. And we set out to put really good people, good apples, in a really bad barrel. We had an ad we put in the Palo Alto newspaper. College students wanted to study a prison life for 2 weeks. 75 people volunteered. We gave them personality tests, interviews. We picked 24, all normal, healthy, and we randomly assigned half to be guards, half to be prisoners. And then the study began. Prisoners were in smocks, they became numbers. Guards were in nice uniforms with symbols of power. And it began in Abu Ghraib, began in most situations with menial tasks, push-ups, jumping jacks, but it always moves toward more and more humiliation and degradation. Again, one of the biggest motivators of evil is boredom. You got an 8-hour shift to kill. And the only playthings you have are the prisoners. And also, the reason we chose a prison, it could have been a summer camp with counselors at camp. Prisons are about power. The job of a guard is to convince you that you have none, and he or she has it all. And so how do you do that? So every day you have to have more and more arbitrary commands, things that don't make sense. And it doesn't have to make sense, you just have to follow the order, or the guard has the ability to punish you. And so this is what we saw, more and more humiliation, more and more degrading. And what happened was, boys we chose because they were normal and healthy, within 36 hours, began to have emotional breakdowns. And when the first kid broke down, he became a model of how you get out. Now again, there was a human subjects committee that approved this, and if any person said, I quit the experiment, I would have to release them. Nobody said that, because after the second day, it was not an experiment. In their minds, it was a prison run by psychologists and not by the state. So once this prisoner broke down, 8612, he became a model of how you get out. And each successive day, another prisoner had the same kind of extreme emotional reaction. Of course, we had parole board, and prisoners went to parole board, but parole board turned them down, as most parole boards do. So at the end of 5 days, 5 normal, healthy college students had emotional breakdowns, and the breakdowns were caused by the really sadistic, brutal behavior of most of the guards. So the study was supposed to go 2 weeks. I ended it after 6 days. And as an aside, I was a principal investigator, but I made the mistake of also being the prison superintendent. And in that role, I got corrupted by the power of the situation, because I allowed I forbade physical violence, but I allowed psychological violence, because the prisoners broke down not because they were being beaten up, but they were subjected to this extreme psychological violence. And so I got trapped in that role of prison superintendent.
In 1971, Phil Zimbardo conducted a revolutionary experiment here in the bowels of Stanford University in the United States. It rocked the world of psychology. A group of students were divided randomly into prisoners and guards and lived in a makeshift jail. The prisoners immediately became submissive, and the guards became cruel.
Not only not getting a cigarette, but for as long as the cell is blockaded,
Within a week, Phil Zimbardo's prison was inhumane, and the experiment had to be cut short. At one stage, prisoner 416 went on hunger strike in protest.
get in that closet then.
So the guards put him in solitary confinement. Amazingly, his fellow prisoners turned on him too. They were given a chance to release him.
Now what will it be? What will it be over here? 416, you're going to be in there for a while. So just get used to it.
He is totally rejected, not only by the guards, but by his other group of prisoners.
So here was a young man who came in late, who saw that this was a madhouse, and he said, I'm quitting. They said, no, you can't quit. He said, I'm going to go on a hunger strike. He's a really skinny kid, and they'll have to release me. So I was excited. Here's somebody's going to be a hero. The problem he did is he went solo. He did not enlist the other prisoners to go on a hunger strike with him. And what the guards did is they said, if he doesn't want to eat, your cellmates don't get breakfast. He doesn't want to eat, you don't get lunch. He doesn't want to eat, you don't get dinner. And so now he became a troublemaker rather than a hero. So again, one of the things we're doing in our Heroic Imagination Project is teaching people how to be effective heroes. And one of the most important ways is to develop a hero network, not to go solo. So here's our study of prisoners being brought to the parole board hearing, headed by an ex-convict with secretaries and ordinary people, and the bags over the head, the legs chained together. And now we go to Iraq. Here's Abu Ghraib, same, bigger bags, obviously bigger guns. And after the abuses were revealed in a series of a dozen pictures that were sent to, I guess, NBC, this was a disgrace, a moral disgrace. And so here's Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and General Karpinski, who should have been in charge, but she never was in that unit. And they want to know who are the bad apples. So the question is, was it just the soldiers on the night shift? Now, interestingly, no abuses on the day shift, so that's a situational variable. And who were the soldiers on the night shift? They weren't soldiers. They were military police. They were Army Reserve. They had no training for this situation, and everybody knew it. They had no leadership training, as I said, with Chip Frederick, the guy he defended. So it was a systemic failure.
My guess is that 99.999% of our armed forces behave admirably at all times. But it's like the rest of society. There will be a few bad apples that will conduct themselves in ways that we're not proud of.
So whenever there's a scandal in the police department, fire department, in any business, what do? You blame the people at the bottom. You say, don't blame us. It's not systemic. It's the bad apples. It's the grunts. When he made that statement, I knew he was lying, because he could not have done an investigation to show that it was not systemic. In fact, in my book, The Lucifer Effect, I did that. And similar things were happening in all the prisons in Iraq. That is, guards humiliating prisoners, stripping them naked. Some even took pictures, and they said we destroyed him after what happened in Abu Ghraib. So it was, in fact, systemic. And here's Rumsfeld, who should have been in charge as Secretary of Defense.
These Iraqi detainees, they were in U.S. custody. Our country had an obligation to treat them right, to treat them as human beings. We didn't do that. That was wrong.
Prior to the Abu Ghraib scandal, Donald Rumsfeld had personally approved a menu of interrogation techniques, including dogs, stress positions, and nudity, that violated long-standing military rules.
So everything that happened in Abu Ghraib, he had approved for Guantanamo Bay. The only thing they didn't approve was for soldiers to take pictures of them doing the evil deeds. So we now have a recipe that make ordinary people turn evil. When I give a talk in high schools, I say in 45 minutes I can get the majority of you to do a really bad thing. First, raise your hand, people who think I can't. As soon as they raise their hand, I said, you're going to be really easy because you're operating with an illusion of invulnerability, and that's rather than a sense of your personal vulnerability. So we have research to back this up. The interesting thing, we turn to heroism, is we know almost nothing about what makes ordinary people become heroes. It's a phenomenon. There's no research on heroism. This term hero and heroism does not exist in any psychology textbook. It's not even part of the positive psychology movement. The positive psychology movement focuses on the virtues of compassion and empathy, which are the highest private virtues, and they say heroism is an action. My argument is heroism is the heroic, the highest civic virtue that transforms compassion into action. So discussion. Brooke is going to lead us in a brief
discussion. We're just going to take 5 minutes since we've gone over some of the situational influences that can be at play. We wanted you just to think. We're going to take a minute to think of what situational influences do you see in your own lives. In your work, are there conversations that happen easily? People stand up to the boss, that strategy is not going to work, actually nobody on the team is following it. Or the situations where people aren't speaking up. Somebody's constantly bullied at work and everyone goes, ugh, but nobody says anything. So take a minute and just think of what you witness in your own life, and then when you have one, turn to a neighbor and share your stories. And we'll give you about 4 minutes to do that. All right, we're gonna move on. Does anybody want to share one situation with the group you talked about? Anything? All right, back to Phil.
So understanding heroism, defined some instances. So defining heroism, it's a big problem because the concept has been distorted in America. So it's celebrities, it's sports figures, anybody who has a lot of visibility becomes a role model for kids, and we think that's wrong. Heroic action is behavior that is engaged in voluntarily. It's conducted in service to one or more people or in support of a moral principle. That's the key. It involves a risk to physical comfort, social stature, or quality of life. Altruism is heroism light. Giving a little money, giving a little blood is a service to the society, but that's the key. There's really has to be a potential cost. Also, you do it without expectation of reward. It could happen later on. And we believe it is learned, taught, modeled. Heroes are not born, they're made. So what does it take to be a hero? The notion was, it's really, you need special qualities. Well, you need to be more empathic, more compassionate, more, future-oriented, so you imagine the consequences. Our answer is no. It's ordinary people, everyday people, taking extraordinary actions. You become a hero by your action, not before you do the action. And taking small actions can have a ripple effect that influences many others, even if you're unaware of it. One of our team members interviewed President Obama and asked him, what does it take to be a hero? How does somebody become, a hero like you or other famous people? And listen what he says about standing up, speaking. I think it's his most profound mini statement.
What's remarkable about history is ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Last year Rosa Parks passed away, and I remember sitting on this stage with world leaders and Bill Clinton and senators and governors and thinking we were all paying homage to a seamstress who had transformed the country and helped transform the world. We never know sort of how our actions are going to ripple over time. But each of us can take some responsibility for making sure that we are pushing a little bit in the direction of justice and in the direction of equality and the direction of tolerance. And when we do that, we may surprise ourselves with the amount of influence that, in fact, we have just by standing up or speaking up.
Thank you. So, inspiring everyday heroism. So my new mission in life is the president and founder of the Heroic Imagination Project. We have offices in the Presidio in San Francisco. We'd love to have you visit. Obviously, our vision is to have it be national, to have hero clubs, hero squads in schools as well as in businesses, and then ultimately to go global. So in the boardroom and executive teams, promoting value-based leadership as a tool to support value-driven behavior. So what if the most important idea in your company is the idea that is simply not being said by anybody? So the primary predictor of success is what we call social fitness. Success of work teams is highly correlated to candor, a powerful antidote to groupthink, infighting, and silo-based thinking. Groupthink, as you know, was a phenomenon developed by my former instructor at Yale, Irving Janis, to account for the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion, one of the biggest disasters in American military history. And the problem was that when John Kennedy said, I think it's a good idea, everybody around said, yeah, it's a good idea, it's good. And the reason he said that is they had two Cuban informants who said, oh, people are going to love it. They were the Cuban fascists who ran away, and it was a disaster. And from that time, Bobby Kennedy said, institute two things. He instituted having a devil's advocate. In every meeting, once there was a consensus, somebody would speak up and say, I disagree. And also, the leader was never allowed to give his or her opinion before group consensus. So those are really critical messages from that failure that we've learned. Social fitness positively impacts employee well-being and the bottom line. It builds social support and communities. So social fitness is the ability to skillfully speak and act on one's values in the face of normal fears. The main reason we don't say things to other people is it's awkward. It's really the fear of being awkward and the discomfort from situational pressures because you want people to like you and you're afraid of making a mistake. The benefits of taking action: research that shows companies with employees motivated to act on their values are better problem solvers, are more collaborative, innovative, and resilient, and they are likely to enhance long-term profitability. Again, it's not focusing on the next quarterly report, but focusing on your profitability in the long term. So, at the intersection of exploration, innovation, drive, the best organizations create self-correcting cultures of integrity, meaning once it begins, you have processes involved that keep it going, that when you start down that slippery slope, there's a built-in process of saying, uh-oh, notice, we're up to 30 volts, we should have stopped at 15, because the most important product any company has is your brand. Anything that sullies your reputation, your brand, is the worst thing that could happen because it takes years to recover from that. It increases trust and communication between your members of your group, and it inspires better performance, actually perform better, and also reduces job turnover. What's the cost of inaction? Opportunities are missed because people don't feel valued and aren't empowered to talk up. Misconduct has been witnessed by nearly half of employees, yet up to half of them don't report it. So when something is going wrong, a lot of people know. They know, and most of them look the other way. That's the evil of inaction. And again, there's a new policy of rewarding external whistleblowing. Every company should be rewarding internal whistleblowing. Every company should go on record of saying, if anything is going wrong, we want our employees to tell us first. And you will get rewarded for it. And we're going to put this on our website, but you're going to get, here's a reward system. Because you want to know in advance something is going wrong, you want to head it off. You don't want it to go public. Pervasive bullying in the workplace now costs up to 10% of the bottom line. And here's these bullies that have gone from junior high school to college, and now they have real power. They're in business, they're managers and foremen, and the same thing of people looking the other way. Discussion 2. When did you engage in a courageous conversation with a colleague, let's say in the last year or so? And when did you not do so, when you knew you should, but it felt too awkward or risky? Again, you want to just take a few minutes to talk to the people near you about when did you do it and when didn't you do it. Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up. I wish we had more time so we could invite you to describe to us what you've been going through. Is any one pair want to simply answer one of these? Shy. Oh, yes, great. Tell us your name. Okay. He said, okay, I know. Yeah. And? Send it anyway?
Well, it was to him. I was writing the notes.
Okay.
That's what we wanted.
Okay. What about when you didn't do it? It's a little more awkward. When did you not do the right thing? Nobody wants to fess up? What? Yes, please. Like what?
Well, in a conversation, I was just talking to my discussion colleague about a situation where I should have contributed to an intellectual conversation that would have made it deeper, but decided not to for fear of with a moral point of view.
Right.
And in this case, it was poverty, and I discovered in these readings that there were many references to idle man, so I was going to discuss the concept of developing welfare society.
Right.
Energy is toward helping poverty.
Great.
Sometimes I think we have to be careful when we talk about boardrooms, particularly when isn't just looking for fraud,
Right.
looking for added goodness as well.
That's wonderful. I mean, the other thing is, it's a little thing like, how do you tell your boss at the end of your company party that he shouldn't really be driving his car? That you realize he's really drunk, and he says, "I'm fine." You know, how do you stand up to say, "No, I'll drive," or "I'll drive you," or something? That's really hard to do. Or you have a coworker that you're going to the party, and she's dressed much too provocatively. How do you say that? So that's the awkward that has nothing to do with the fraud. That's really an interpersonal thing that could have really bad consequences. If the boss gets in trouble, gets a driving DUI, or she gets hit on, and you don't say something you knew you should have, you knew you could have, you might have changed that. Okay, so with that, let me rush on to our conclusion. So we have a number of research-based programs. Essentially, we apply everything we know from not only the Stanford prison study, but 40 years of research on social psych, to illustrate the power of the situation. We have a number of programs we highlight each of those social psychological variables that can creep in to influence behavior and decision making. And we focus on human vulnerability, that we're all vulnerable. I mean, I'm saying the lesson from the Stanford prison study is not that some kids did a bad thing, it's that I allowed bad things to happen. I was the adult, I was a trained researcher. I was the system, and I was corrupted. But the point is, our program builds skills, it's not just ideas, to consistently act on our values, creating cultures that value the development of moral courage. You can't have a courageous conversation until you have built up some moral courage to do so. So again, all our programs are research-based. Skill building programs to increase engagement of workers, raise awareness of situational influence, build skills to act on one's values, always in the face of contrary pressures, using our evidence-based social fitness training. And we always do pre and post measures. We just did a pilot recently at Google where we have pre and post measures of attitudes, values, and ideally behavior change. And we do it before we go in and then after the end of our workshop. And we've had very good success there. And social fitness training, as I started to say before, was developed 25 years ago here at Stanford. Lynn Henderson, who took over the Shyness Clinic that I had developed. And it's evidence-based model shown to change behavior. And what we do is it's structured skills building protocol. And it teaches people how to act wisely and effectively. It's a learning-based model of how do you interrupt your usual patterns of responding, and how do you enrich the social support around you so that you feel comfortable in doing the right thing when others are not. So really it's like a flight simulator, learning to act optimally in the presence of fear or stress. So essentially the reason we don't do stuff is we're afraid. It's really afraid to look awkward, afraid to be too vulnerable, afraid to be the only one saying the thing. And you really have to know most other people are thinking what you're thinking. Adrenaline is a cue to act rather than a cue for fear. And essentially, our training primes the brain for skillful action. So the HIP corporate program says, social influence model, we raise awareness of situational forces, we build skills to take action in the fitness training, and together we're now certifying trainers to offer small group follow-on coaching that helps ensure the practice and long-term behavioral change. So what we're doing now is we're developing workshops for a day, 2 days, 3 days of this combination of teaching you about situational influence, situational power, skills building, how to do courageous conversation with role-playing and feedback. So what can you do now? It's how you address everyday ethical challenges, prevent first steps down the slippery slope. So the first step, remember, all evil begins with 15 volts. Soon as somebody says, well, I know it's not exactly right, well, then don't do it. What do you do matters. So become a pattern interrupter. The problem with patterns is they become familiar. This is what we do. This is what we do around here. And especially when you're new to the situation, you question everything, okay? Create an adaptive, self-correcting culture of integrity. Individual actions ensure integrity and the success of the whole company. So, in our corporate program, one way to describe what we're doing is we are in the process of making corporate heroes who champion integrity and moral courage with compassion. There's a young woman here who's a C-Care volunteer. C-Care is a Stanford Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research, and Education, started by Jim Doty. I'm on his board. He has actually funded some of the research that we've done. We don't have time now to talk about it. But what I didn't mention is we have a vibrant education program that we pre-tested for 2 years in high schools. Our high school kids are now teaching middle school kids our lessons, and now this year we're spreading out to colleges. And we have a huge number of teachers of psychology really excited because we're in the process of making useful heroes who oppose intolerance, indifference, and incivility. And we teach them that in order to be a hero, you have to really first walk on the dark side. You You have to know what those influence agents do. And they use all the tactics of social influence, all the negative tactics of social influence. And once we fortify you against their power, then we inspire you to heroic action by showing you examples of heroes like you, and then we coach you how to be a wise and effective hero. Not wise and effective hero, take wise and effective heroic action. The problem is every mother in the universe says what? Don't get involved, mind your business. You have to say, Mama, humanity is my business. If I don't help other people, who's going to help me when I'm down? And also, when I have kids, I'm going to pass on a coward gene, which I don't want to do. So our goal is to develop these corporate program and educational programs side by side. And we believe positive deviance can be taught. That is really, the reason people don't stand out, speak up, is it feels deviant because nobody else is doing it. The biggest message that we teach in our classes is the bystander effect. If you're in trouble, if you're in an emergency, if you're sick, the worst thing that can happen to you is there are a lot of people around you. Because the more people there are, the less likely anyone's to help. Your chance of being helped is greatest if there's only one person. So what does that mean? We teach our kids that message. We show videos. All of our training, we excite kids through various videos, including funny ones from Candid Camera, from the prison study, from other material I've developed. And then we say, now that you have this knowledge, it obligates you to take action. That's something I've never done in all my years of teaching. I taught Stanford students these things, and all they had to do was give it to me back on the exam. No. Once you know about the bystander effect, that means when you're in that situation, you're going to do what? You're going to call 911. You're going to go over and say, excuse me, ma'am, are you okay? You seem upset. Or she seems upset. Will a woman in the purple blouse come and help me? We want you to be a wise hero, but you have to act. It's not enough not to act. And I'll end briefly with the story of our program is most successful in inner city schools because everybody's telling these kids you're nothing. I said, no, you have an inner hero that's been suppressed. So we've been working in Arise High School in Oakland. We hope to work in East Palo Alto with Claude Steele, Dean of Education soon. And so Philip Johnson, 17-year-old African-American kid, is riding on a bus, and some kid is wheezing. And other kids are saying, throw him off the bus, he's irritating us. He goes to the kid and says, what's wrong? The kid said, I lost my inhaler, I can't breathe. He goes to the bus driver and says, please stop at a pharmacy. Goes off with the kid, gets an inhaler, takes the kid home. He saves his life. He was interviewed, I guess, Canadian Broadcasting Company. They said, why did you do that? He said, it was the bystander effect that I learned on HIP. I had to take action. How could I not? So it's only one case of behavior change, but it's really, really inspiring for us. So we believe that positive deviance can be taught. It empowers people to speak up, disrupt unhealthy patterns, and create healthy ones. And with that, I want to thank you and we have time for questions. Little time, I know we've run over, we started a little bit late. Maybe Brooke can lead Q&A. Thanks very much.
Oh yeah, and if anybody wants to ask questions, you found the mic. Yes. Oh yeah, and everybody, it's after 7, so if anybody needs to leave, and we'll stay all around and as long as people have questions.
I just have a question about what you found in your years of research about the difference between men and women, and what you think about the fact that to this talk about 2/3 of the audience is women, when roughly 15% of boards are women. I find that somewhat interesting.
You're going to have to answer this.
In a totally other world, I gave a talk on TED last year called The Demise of Guys. And I have a TED book coming out May 15th. And what I'm arguing is that guys are vanishing, and guys become men. So we don't know where they are. In psychology, most psychology classes are now 70 to 80% women. Before the guys went to economics, no, they're not there. Before the guys went to engineering, they're not there. So women now are overrepresented, if you will, in virtually every area because guys have vanished. I think they're simply in their room playing video games and watching pornography. Okay? That's my thesis. And nobody wants to know that, and nobody wants to hear that, least of all their mothers. And the other problem is half of all the boys in America are growing up fatherless. What's wonderful about mothers, they give unconditional love. They don't motivate boys to success. Fathers make love conditional upon performance. And boys are not getting that. Literally 50% from divorce, separation, unwed mothers, fathers psychologically absent. So I'm saying that combination of fathers absent, excessive, socially isolated, living in your room playing video games 15 hours a week. I did a program on Dr. Phil. He's going to be broadcast this month. There's a kid there with his mother, and the kid said, I don't have a problem. I only play 16 hours a day. Call of Duty. He doesn't see that as a problem. Well, he stopped going to school. He stopped his job. He stopped talking to friends. And then when he's not doing that for a break, he watches pornography X hours a day. So essentially, it's a phenomena. I'm saying in most situations like this, the majority of the audience is women. The question is, where are the guys? And the answer is that we don't know. No. The problem is the old guys are in the boardroom with the power, but women should know, and I have 2 daughters, they're going to die soon, okay? So your hope is they die faster rather than later.
We don't always say that. Anyway, what's your question?
One of the few remaining guys. Okay, so you just speak about, it was very interesting, how not to take the slippery slope, how to become a hero.
And then when he's not doing that for a break, he watches pornography X hours a day. So essentially, it's a phenomena. I'm saying in most situations like this, the majority of the audience is women. The question is, where are the guys? And the answer is that we don't know. No. The problem is the old guys are in the boardroom with the power, but women should know, and I have 2 daughters, they're going to die soon, okay? So your hope is they die faster rather than later.
We don't always say that. Anyway, what's your question?
One of the few remaining guys. Okay, so you just speak about, it was very interesting, how not to take the slippery slope, how to become a hero. Now, let's suppose some people have taken the slippery slope. How do you cure them? And what do you do with them? Do you think someone who have, okay, because you say it's very easy, as you say, to go into that. So do you think we should give a second chance to the people who have taken this path once? And how do we be sure that, how can society handle the people who have failed?
That's a good question. You're our man.
So essentially what we have is, we want people to begin by saying, we want you to internalize the mindset that is, that I think of myself as a hero in training, okay? I'm not a hero now, and so I'm going to do little things every day to build my heroic muscle, if you will. And we give you various exercises, this week, every day, make somebody feel special. What does that mean? Give a compliment. What's a compliment? Nobody gives compliments anymore, guys and women, okay? Compliments are dead. No, we want to revive, because compliments make people feel special. And we teach you how to give a compliment. You start with something external. Hey, that's a really pretty tie. What a beautiful color. It's not the tie, it's not the color of her dress. It really looks good on you. So now you're saying, you're implying she made a choice which reflects on her. And then you move from external to internal. Gee, I really like what you said about that, or that was really profound. You tell your teacher how inspiring it is. You tell your mother how good the dinner is, etc. So what does that do? It means every situation you go in, you are focused on the other. Heroes are sociocentric. The problem with heroism is egocentrism. If I go into a situation I'm concerned about me, I'm not even going to notice that she's lying in the gutter. So this is one part of overall training to become a hero. And what we want to do is have kids sign up online and say, hey, I'm doing this. A health hero. If you get somebody in your family to stop smoking, you save a life. It's just like jumping on a railroad track to save somebody across the track. It's hard to do. My parents both died of excessive cigarette smoking. It's one of the failures in my life. But we're going to teach you how to do it. And again, the power of the web is kids are going to sign up saying, yeah, I'm going to do it. It's my father, my uncle. And then we're going to teach you how to do it effectively, because there are a lot of smoking cessation programs. So essentially, it's how do you get somebody, just an ordinary guy, ordinary girl, and start them on the path, instead of a slippery slope down, we want to grease the path up. So they're going to do little things each day that when the opportunity presents itself, they're going to act. So we're just changing probabilities, that the probability will increase that when they see a challenge, when they see an emergency, they will act when ordinarily they would not.
But I think, too, what you may have been asking is, if somebody starts down the slippery slope, do they get the, do you get to be let off the hook, or are you responsible, or how do you fix the problem? Again, we do focus systemically. We don't toss the bad apple. We try to look at the system in which they were in. Similar to the Abu Ghraib, he was a witness, he was an expert witness for the defense for one of the guards. It didn't mean that he didn't think that he had to pay for some of the bad behavior, but there should be mitigating circumstances for his sentencing, because you could look to the system as influencing his behavior. So does that help answer your? Right, he's still responsible, but there's mitigating circumstances. Does that somehow answer your question a little bit more?
More generally, Kelly, do you think we should give a second chance to the people who have been through the slippery slope? Because society don't give a second chance. So you say it's so easy to go to the slippery slope. It must be also easy also to stay on the path and go back to the normal situation.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think in some of our corporate work, at least in one of the examples, that if somebody comes forward, you give the people the out or the ability to come forward and admit a mistake, and then you can fix it. So there isn't the zero tolerance of it happens once. But I think you're really clear with your values, but you look at the systemic influence as well. Go ahead.
I just have a heads up. There's money in them, our values. There's money, big money in those values. Mm-hmm. You can work with a community group who has an identity that is very obvious or evident or whatever, and you can work with them to make businesses based on integrity. There's an attempt to do that in East Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. And that means this group modifies its behavior, it polices each other, they know each other, and this is the ideal template that's being drawn. They can change their community and they can have a thriving business. Mm-hmm. Similarly, this is a lead-in. Okay, I admit it. Similarly, you can look at all of this, not from we're looking at how do you get corporate heroism. There are other models out there of how you start at the base. Just like this community, there's value for them, financial value for them branding themselves with these integrity and heroism values. And now segueing into, there's the models out there in the world of grassroots organizations starting from how do we make our lives, our children's lives better, and they are now in existence a long time. So there's lots of models out there for success that you can call on that shows investors, social philanthropists, that there's a lot of money to be made and there's a lot of success, starting with the basic value of family, child unit. And now I'm going to pass it to Musimbi. Sorry, I had to work to get her here. It was not easy to get her or Ann Firth Murray here.
Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to appreciate the presentation. It was really very important. But I have two short questions. One is, in my understanding, when we deal with systemic kind of problems, when we actually go directly to the people that have become victimized by the system, we are dealing with answering for their needs. it's always my thinking that if it's systemic, you go with where the system is being caused. In other words, I'm trying to think, is East Palo Alto or what was the other place you're working? Oakland, really the targets for systemic change of the kind of behavior that has resulted into the people in those places having to be what they are? Where is the system change that you will affect? I think it's beyond those people that live in those geographies. So that's one question. And the other short question is, I'm really delighted that you are focusing on the younger people, the next boardrooms and executives. Is there hope for the current ones? Because we are in trouble today.
The reason people don't focus on systemic change, it's really hard. I mean, the biggest evil in the world is poverty. There's new evidence that people who grow up in poverty live several years shorter lives. Poverty kills, and before it kills, it creates cynicism. You know, if you grow up in East Oakland, it's really different than if you grow up in Atherton, Palo Alto, in every way imaginable. That getting to school is a challenge because nobody drives you. The bus comes late. You're waiting for the bus, and somebody's going to rob you or shoot you, whatever. And then you get home and nobody's there, and there's no food in the refrigerator, and it just goes on, and there are no books, and the power's out because you didn't pay the PG&E bill. What?
Refrigerator.
Right. No, but I'm talking about ghetto. No, so if nobody has a refrigerator, then it's another story. But it's also the relative deprivation. Your classmates, they have refrigerators, they have internet, they have computers that work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just a struggle every single day. The other big problem is fatherlessness is even a bigger problem in minority communities than in white communities. When I say 50%, that's averaging African American and white. So if you grow up without a father, without a grandfather, really without uncles, you grow up without people who are role models, people are going to motivate you. So I'll kick your ass if you. What do you mean you're not going to go to school? Sit down, do the homework. Your friends will come later. Mothers are not going to do that. Mothers are going to say, "I love you, no matter what." Okay, that's not enough. Love is not enough to succeed in this life. So again, systemic change means how do you get young men to be responsible for the children they give birth to? Well, systemic is the government gives you more money if you are a single parent. Well, that law has to be changed. Government should give you money if you are a family unit rather than if you're a single mom, because that encourages women to say, hey, let's not get married because you're going to cost me money. Okay. I think we have time for one last question.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Philip Zimbardo. One question I wanted to ask is you earlier just drew the distinction between those who do evil and those who allow evil to happen. But what do you do when two well-meaning people, and let's say in this case, one well-meaning person thinks voting for Obama is the right thing to do, and one doesn't, and the one who doesn't might think so because to vote for Obama is to legitimize murder of assassinations of people in countries abroad via drone strike. So when you have that sort of disconnect between two well-meaning people that agree with the idea and the importance of not allowing evil to happen, what sort of mechanisms would you recommend to deal with that?
That's your thing.
Well, yeah, we don't deal with it on that level, but
No, that's a difference of point of view. So you could argue that as president, he should not allow drones. People want drones because you'd rather have a plane shot down than American soldiers killed. The big problem now with the drones is it's pushing us toward wars of technology that people will support because it means American men and women are not going to get killed. Just civilians over there when we make a mistake, as we do once a week in Afghanistan, we happen to bomb a household. That's not Obama's decision. those decisions are made by the military system, the defense system, the political parties. Obama cannot be seen as soft in order to win the election because the Republicans are pushing him to be hard. In the same way, when we did the Stanford prison study, there were 360,000 Americans in prison. This year, there are 2.7 million Americans in cages. It's astounding. How could that be? And it simply is become a political issue of politicians starting in 1975 saying, I am tough on crime, my opponent is not. Rehabilitation doesn't work. Somebody did research in 1975 that said rehabilitation doesn't work, so they eliminated all rehabilitation programs. And so now prisons are there for punishment only, and Americans are supporting it. It used to be that if you committed 3 violent crimes, you could go, you were guilty of 3 strikes, and you could go to prison 25 years to life. Prosecutors now can label anything they want as a serious crime, and it could be 3 drug offenses. So the chances of an African-American man from 18 to 30 years old to be in prison is 10 times likely than him to be in college. Whole African-American communities are being wiped out because the young men are in prison. And that means they're felons, they can never vote, they probably never could get a job. Who wants to hire a felon? And, and they're gone for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. And again, here's the systemic racism. If the charge is using crystal meth, the penalty is twice as much as using heroin or cocaine. It doesn't make sense. And again, here's where you have to change. You change systemic. You have to change the law. You have to get politicians to change the law, legislators to change. But for me, this is the worst thing imaginable since the prison study, is that after we did the study, I was giving talks, legislating about how prisons dehumanize people, et cetera, and we should retrain guards. Irrelevant. The prison system now is, okay, we have more people in prison than any nation in the world, including Russia, including China, probably any 2 nations combined. That should be a disgrace for Americans. That's for me, that's the biggest disgrace. I think we have time for one question.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a question. It's kind of a comment that came out of Musimbi's questions or comments. And that is, I can understand, and incidentally, I think what you're doing is very important and relates to some work that I'm doing. But I think Musimbi was asking if in your research, whether or not it might be useful to not only include kids from East Palo Alto and Oakland and whatever, high school kids, but move to training of positional leaders who aren't heroes, people who in fact are in a position to illustrate what you're doing by changing themselves. And so maybe
what's a positional hero?
Positional leaders who are in no way heroic.
Right.
So I would love to suggest that workshops be offered to members of Congress, people who are in leadership positions but who know nothing about the kind of heroism that you are talking about.
Leadership positions of different kind.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about positional leadership, which in my view is not true leadership. Right. People who are in positions of influence, they may be celebrities, I don't know. Right. I'd like to see your workshops offered to such people so that they become heroic and they're in positions to influence your this approach.
That's great.
Suggestion.
No, it's wonderful suggestion. We have a few brochures and a few business cards we'd love you to take and keep in touch with Brooke if you're interested at all in workshops and getting involved with us. Thanks so much.